In my final episode of the series, I speak with Dr. Jennifer Cassidy, or the Oxford diplomat, as she's commonly known on social media platforms. Jennifer is a diplomatic scholar and speaks daily to her 300,000 followers across X and Instagram. She lectures at the University of Oxford on diplomacy and international law, digital diplomacy, and gender and diplomacy. Her PhD, which she completed in 2017, focused on the accelerating collaboration of politics and social media. In our conversation, Jennifer shares her career to date, from her first posting with Ireland's permanent mission to the United Nations in New York, to her time working in the European External Action Service to the Kingdom of Cambodia, to her work now in academia. She's honest and she is open as she speaks. This sharing isn't just confined to this conversation either. She's open and honest on her social media platforms too. Here is our conversation. I've been a long admirer of you online and your voice and how you use online, but taking it back to your focus on your work in diplomacy, especially in digital and gender diplomacy, ultimately, what does that mean? How does that impact people listening? And tell us all the scale, all the stories of working in Oxford.
Yeah, well, regarding gender and diplomacy and digital diplomacy, just to give you just a very brief background of how I got into this. So, as some may know, that I started my degree in violin, never had any intention of working in academia whatsoever, but here we are. So I started the degree and then had a back injury, and I was like, oh, well, what on earth will I do? Like, never won an academic prize in school or anything of the sort. So I absolutely loved history, and I decided, oh, what goes along well with that? Politics. So this was, and just being, brutally honest, this is, I don't come from like a political or, lawyer or academic based family, but I was like, okay, this suits well. And so, yes, it just progressed my love for academic history lessened as I went on. And my love, to put it diplomatically, my love for politics, it clearly was always there, even though my whole life was focused on violin. It was clearly always there. Mm. So, moving straight forward then to the PhD, I did my undergrad in Ireland. Moving straight forward to the PhD, my focus was, I wanted to be on digital diplomacy. Now, at this stage, I had been a diplomat for 5 years, and no one was allowed to use Twitter or Facebook. This was 2010, 11. No diplomat was allowed to use Facebook in the hall or as a diplomat. Not at all.
And just to tell listeners, so your diplomatic experience saw you in the Perm Rep, and you might give us a little insight into what those few years looked like for you.
Yeah, so I was, extremely fortunate to, after my master's, to get, everyone was applying for internships, but as we know, internships are unpaid, which is absurd. And there was no way that was happening. For me, I wouldn't have been able. So I was extremely fortunate to get a contract with the Department of Foreign Affairs in Ireland, and have my first posting as with the permanent mission to the Ireland's permanent mission to the UN in New York as a diplomatic attaché. Of course, the most senior level, but this was just phenomenal for me. And something, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but please do stop me. That during my master's, I put out so many applications because I knew I needed a job, and got so many rejections. And as everyone does, but as I lay my head on the last night, on the pillow on the last night in Oxford. My stuff was already in the van, ready to go back to Ireland. And my poor dad was on a sleeping bag, which had deflated on the ground, like lying beside me. And I just thought, oh, I'll check my emails. And I got the email to say I'd got the job. So, you know, as I say to my students, I'm like, you literally just have to keep knocking on the door. Like someone's going to get it. But the experience in New York was absolutely phenomenal, and just so eye-opening of how the UN works. And I feel so fortunate to have seen the inner workings of it for good and for bad. And, as people may or may not know, the UN is an alphabetical order. So there's Iran, Iraq, Ireland, Israel. So it was quite the seat to be sitting in. And, I never thought, oh, I'll be writing notes in the embassy, for the few years. But they're like, no, Jennifer, you'll be sitting there. I was like, oh, okay. And then after that, the contract ended because at that time we were still under the IMF restrictions, so you couldn't permanently hire in the in foreign affairs. And then I got offered a job, another contract by the European Diplomatic Service to the Kingdom of Cambodia. So I was working for the EU embassy there in Cambodia, working on the Khmer Rouge tribunals for 2 or 3 days a week, and then human rights and development issues for the other 3 days of the week in Phnom Penh. And then I came back to Ireland. Then I got another contract with Foreign Affairs when Ireland had the chairmanship of the OSCE 2012 and the presidency of the Council of the European Union of 2013. And so after that, I decided maybe I'm not the best diplomat out there. I was not fired. I will put that out there. The Foreign Affairs can fully back me up on this. In fact, all truth, the contract was to be extended, but I just knew personally that. And this was a time in Ireland when, we look at Ireland now and we think it's moved so fast. Like, not that we even think it's moved so fast. We look at it, and other, the students that I teach now who are actual diplomats look at Ireland and think we are such a liberal state, and we have all these liberal laws. But at the time when I was working there, the marriage equality referendum wasn't passed. The Eighth Amendment wasn't even on the table for consideration. And so I knew I just could not be. It's the same way that I'm not part of a political party in Ireland, and nor have I ever been. And it's not that I don't agree with policies of a number of policies with certain parties, but I would, as someone just the way I am, I'd have to agree with. For right or wrong, I'd have to agree with absolutely everything, to speak it. And I just knew that as a diplomat, you are a mouthpiece for the government, and that's not usually that is said in a critical tone. But it's wonderful, for states who are doing, brilliantly, and it's wonderful for Ireland in so many cases. But I just knew that there would be times in the career progressing where I wouldn't agree with this, and I would just feel too uncomfortable speaking for it. So I just knew I needed something for my own voice. And this is a huge disclaimer. When I say my own voice, I'm not saying I am right all along. In no way I'm saying let me speak because everything I speak is truth and wisdom. No way. I get it wrong too, completely. But at least I have the freedom as an academic to speak, to explore, to understand. Also, to be wrong, and then. For example, I on social media, I put up stuff like a number of times that was wrong, and I'm always willing to be told, this is not that it's not true, but this is wrong. Have you thought of it looking at it from this point? And I will always be willing to retract, but that's not the way diplomacy is. So that's one of the reasons I moved.
And for anybody who doesn't have the privilege of following your good self, Jennifer, Oxford Diplomat, and you will see this ferociously warm and honest and transparent voice. And I say that in a world where X, formerly known as Twitter, is not always the nicest of places for folks like yourself who are constantly trying to raise the bar on factual information sharing. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But I really wanted to pivot back a little bit to, you're looking at, so 2010, your number of years as a diplomat. Then, I mean, you and I are, I'm going to say, similar age. I won't age you now. I'm probably a little bit older than you. But understanding and looking at it in the foresight that you did to know digital would play such a powerful role in the political arena, in the world arena, not just political, but that narrative. And then on the opposite side, well, not opposite, but linked to it, the gender diplomacy and where we are right now too, within the context of digital. Like, did you see that? Is that why you're like, right, this is how this work will impact people listening? Or were you like, actually, my gut feeling is taking me here and this is where we're going to go?
It was, I've always followed my gut, for better or worse, always followed it. And I have been really, anyone who knows me knows I'm obsessed with gadgets and technology and everything like this. I'm not the best at technology, but I just love, all aspects of technology. And when, for example, to give that example, when we were in the UN hall and no one was allowed to use Twitter or Facebook. And it wasn't even a question of whether you weren't allowed. No one would even dare attempt. It wasn't even a question on people's mind of saying, oh, should I use it? Like, this was just seen as the most undiplomatic thing to do. And I won't name the ambassador, but the only ambassadors I saw using like any technology in the General Assembly was an ambassador at the very front who was playing Angry Birds. And we could all see him playing Angry Birds, and myself included. I was very into this game, and Ban Ki-moon was speaking on weapons of mass destruction. This is all no word of a lie. And the entire hall was focused on this ambassador playing Angry Birds, like putting back the bird, pushing it, and then we were going, ooh, like the whole countries. And Ban Ki-moon must have thought he was giving this amazing speech and everyone was so into, but we were just highly into this game of Angry Birds. But that was the peak of technology in the General Assembly. But I went to my supervisor. So after I left diplomacy, I went to my supervisor, who was my supervisor for my master's, who I had said that to him during the master's, never in my life would I do a PhD. So you will get a sense, if you're not getting a sense already, that I very much go with the flow. It may look like my life has been like, oh, very good steps, like, oh, plan steps one after the other. Not the case at all. And I went to him, and I am so, he is the professor of diplomacy at Oxford, Cornelia Biola. He is a phenomenal man. And I just looked at with my supervisor, and I went to him and I said, look, I think, I said I wasn't doing a PhD. Let's forget that. I was in a weird place. But I said, this has to be coming down the track because no one's using it in the hall. No one was using it in Cambodia. No one was using it during back in Ivy House. But like every single person outside, the minute you stepped outside Ivy House, the minute you stepped outside General Assembly, everyone was on Facebook, everyone was on Twitter, myself included. And I was just like, there's no way this is not going to get into the hall. Every aspect of technology since the telegram has impacted diplomacy. Every single aspect. And I was like, there's just no way that this is not gonna make it into diplomacy. So I proposed it to him, and he took the chance on it, and I said, but there's no literature on it. What are we going to do? Because, with the PhD, so much of it is literature based. And he just like, well, we're just going to have to publish inside ourselves. I was like, so it's like, I was like, love it. my type of supervisor, as Cassidy says, like, yeah. So,
as someone
but
who just to interject there, as someone who just recently finished a master's in ag extension innovation, I can tell you this: if I turned around to my poor lecturer, who's my minor thesis advisor, let me just remind you, and said, "Listen, I'm thinking I'm doing a PhD," he'd be like, "Please go away for at least 6 months until you grow up and know how to be an academic," because he wouldn't dare say that, but he's too kind for that. But I applaud you, because that's not just an undergrad or a cert or a master's, and not taking away for the work that they do, but a PhD. How many, I mean, even now you're still dedicating your life to these topics that you wrote on, but how many years from when you had that conversation to when the doctor came before Jennifer did it take you?
Well, I say this, I hopefully tone is so hard to come across on this without any notions whatsoever, but 2.5 years. So, but that was primarily due
Oxford
to
diplomat, everybody. Oxford diplomat.
but that was primarily due to as well funding. Like, I didn't have the luxury. People got like 5-year scholarships because it all depends on what you work on. If you're working on migration, and these are all of course worthy areas of exploration, like, but no one was taking the chance on this thing that didn't exist, right? So I had limited funding, and that's all I could
Facilitate.
afford. Yeah, and I was just like, I need to get it done. And it sounds so cheesy, but like, if you just and it is huge thanks to my supervisor. He gave me such time, and a lot of supervisors. I've heard horror stories of other supervisors, but he gave me such time, and we were both so interested in the subject together. And by the end of it, so my 2 key case studies actually were the Eurobaiting crisis in Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea, and then Israel-Gaza 2014. So people are saying, can you stop writing case studies? And I was like, I very much agree. So and the reason I chose them was not a foresight, of anything coming, but it was because it was it was real time. I looked at how diplomats use social media during political crises, and they were the real time data that I could take and use. And so the day before my last viva in Oxford, you have 3 vivas, which actually allows you basically a lot of people to blame if you fail, because you have one at like it's meant to be 3 or 4 years, and one's at the end of first year, etc. So basically, it stops anything going horrifically wrong at the end, because there's been so many people to stop being like, no, this isn't working. So that's a really, really good system. But so Trump came along the last year of my PhD, and he was a walking, breathing thesis. Like, everyone was like, stop tweeting. And I was like, keep tweeting. But obviously I didn't want him to keep tweeting, but in a real way, I kind of did, because he was just proving everything. Everyone went from, this is not a thing, heads of state don't use it, to the entire world focused on the US president using Twitter. And the day before my last viva, he was tweeting North Korea and calling him, little rocket man. And everyone was like, we're going to be dead. This is and the whole thing about a PhD is, the question is, well, why does this matter? Now that I supervise PhDs, in 2 weeks, I'm an examiner for a PhD in Oxford, and I'm like, how is this possible? But the whole thing is, why does this matter? Why are you telling me this? And, as I said to them, have you seen Trump's tweets yesterday? And they were like, it just proved it completely. So
to jump in there based off, and I wanted to pick up a little bit on the gender diplomacy piece, and I'm going to do that in a bit. But I think the next question has to be the use of social media. I think it's very fair to say social media has profoundly impacted and altered our politics around the world. What we think about, how we think about it, how the information is getting to us. And I've been really catching myself of late about flagging misinfo and disinfo without giving examples.
Yeah.
But there is just so much of it because, you know, I could read one report where they say just under 80% of what we see on a daily basis is fake news. Another report is, you know, every 3 to 4 pieces of information we see online is fake. However, you know, what is checking that is where we rely on research and academics like yourself. And like how, for the good and the bad and the ugly, we have local, European, national, USA, worldwide elections upcoming, and not just upcoming in the next couple of years, in the next months. Like how do you foresee that coming? Like how do we determine as consumers of information on social media what is real and what is not? And like, can I preface this with, every time I go to schools, I'm always like, first and foremost, regardless of who you vote for, just make sure use your voice, make sure you vote. And also think about critical thought, like what you're consuming, how you're consuming. But anyways, I threw a lot at you there, Jennifer, but just to me, the good, the bad and the ugly in terms of the use of it. I mean, now my brain is exploding of like, look at Brexit. And I believe social media played a role on that, as it did from what research tells us. But what is it and how do we navigate around it in terms of elections and social media?
Well, so I just wrote 6,900 words on a chapter of disinformation, diplomacy, and AI yesterday. So good question. And how AI is, you know, the speed at which AI is the artificial intelligence is moving is extremely, extremely worrying regarding disinformation. You know, we also, with the process of social media, we all thought that this was going to be the great democratic tool, right? You know, this was going to be something that informed everyone, and that anyone who held a digital device had the power, and, you know, smaller nations could, just because they didn't have the monetary backing, now with their virtual technology, they could have just as much power, and their voice could be heard just to and given to as many people. But with the disinformation, with the voting coming up, you know, I will always say, if I don't have an answer, it is it's extremely hard to spot, particularly with the, as I said, the artificial intelligence tools coming up. But what's important here is getting sources and having people both online in your life and offline in your life who, you know, they say on the internet that, you know, just like oil is the greatest resource offline, credibility is the greatest resource online. And like, once you lose your credibility online, you know, that's done. That's why I'm so careful to double, triple check everything. And even if it's not the popular opinion, as I, you know, said in the interview today, facts are facts and evidence are evidence. So, you know, making sure that you have key people online that you trust, and you know that what they're putting out is correct, and not just going through, you know, entire feeds. Because if you start going through like, latest news and reading that is where disinformation, you know, really
spreads. It's like wildfire.
Really spreads. And so, you know, it comes back to like one of my key phrases about, one of my key endings of the PhD and still my work to date is, you know, I went into this being like, went into my study on technology and diplomacy being like, oh, wait for this. This is just going to blow the literature on diplomacy out of the water. It will never be the same again. No, how wrong I was. Like, it my concluding, and I stick to it to this very, very day, that digital diplomacy, and what I mean by digital diplomacy, I'm just referring to like technology and diplomacy, the use of technology with diplomacy. It's just an evolution, not a revolution. So we've always seen disinformation used in campaigns pre-technology. Something that I always stress is that like we must not like lose any sense of historical consciousness, that there was like no disinformation before technology. There was no propaganda before technology. Yes, the speed at which it's put out. Yes, the quantity at which it's put out. Yes, the impact and how it can twist and war people at such greater speeds is nothing like we've seen before. But the true essence of it, the true like reasoning behind it is still the same. So as I said, it's an evolutionary tool, not a revolution. And so what did we do in history? We looked to credible sources, and these were newspapers that people went to. So I advise people to, really have your key sources online, and be it a media, be it a top media report that you television that program that you trust, and also broaden your network. Don't just follow. This is said. I'm sure people have heard this before, but don't just follow the people that you agree with, because you need to hear that. And I've gotten so many throughout the years, like the whatever 14 years on Twitter, people saying, "Oh, I'm unfollowing because I saw you followed this person." But how on earth are you ever going to? I am a complete pragmatist. I'm like, okay, if my goal is X, i.e. the achievement of this person in an election, or I want this policy to win, if that's my goal, the only way to do that is to truly understand why people would be voting for the other side, why people want to vote for the policies they do. People aren't reckless with their votes, even if we want to dismiss the other side and say, oh, they don't know what they're voting for. They do. They have some kind of impetus behind it. So, broaden your base, have credible sources. And the AI aspect is a completely that could be a different conversation. But that I'll just point one note on that is, and that I think there should be regulation regarding the way there was previously. Again, this comes back to the evolution point. We've always had stops on when you can start. You have to campaign, right? When you have to stop campaigning. Mm-hmm. And I think that should be a regulation on social media, because now what we're seeing with deep fakes is you could see, this is particularly, with the US elections coming up, you could see something that a candidate said, and it's a deep fake. And that could be 12 hours beforehand because they don't have that stricter rules. And there's so real, to use the word. And a lot of people who do not know about deepfakes, who do not know about this, see this, and it completely affects them going in. So there needs to be stronger regulations online about when you can stop, because disinformation, as we know, spreads rapidly, and it will stay in people's heads whether they truly believe it or not.
Can I pick up from that point, actually, because we've been alerted. And please correct me if any examples or things I'm saying is incorrect, because I want you also to now I also lean on your experience and your wisdom in this. So deepfakes on the rise. We have been told, sadly, as female MEPs seeking re-election, that sadly deepfakes will be used in order to diminish our credibility. And I say generally because I generalize that as in we, because we don't know if they're coming, how they're going to come, who's going to put them out, and all those great things. But what we see from France in particular at their national elections, deepfakes were very much used as a tool to diminish female candidates and their estimating. But with that, right, so I believe, and from speaking with you, I believe you also believe the the makeup of politics, and I should never assume, but I'm going to just go out on a limb here, but the makeup of politics in the European Parliament right now, or in many institutions, are not balanced or not reflective of our society. So right now we have 500 million citizens. Within the European Parliament, we have 60% men over a certain age, about 40% women, less than 3% of people of colour, less than 10% in terms of people who identify like myself as terms of LGBTQI+. And then you have social media, deepfakes, perhaps the lack of women stepping forward or those who identify as women. And then on the other hand, you have the likes of our first female president of the Commission, who requested that each EU country in 2019 propose two names for commissioner, a male and female, in order to have gender balance. Now, I say all of that with, how do we look at gender diplomacy in the world of digital age and try and get more people to be reflective of our society and our communities? Is that possible given your experience?
Yeah. That's like a PhD question in itself. I'm like, I'll see you back in 2 years. No, the no, you know, completely agree with what you said, and mentioning the elections that we see also happen previously, that this is evidence based. This is not us saying that females are
Targeted.
targeted. Yeah, I went off Twitter for a bit in October, November. Still on thing because of numerous death threats offline. When I got two offline from the department, I was like, okay, goodbye. Like, and I had never ever received them during, as I said, the 13 years, like I've been on it, but it was due to me speaking out for Palestine. And what I did not, and I did, this person that messaged me highlighting this thread about me, I think they thought they were doing me a favor, but I truly wish I never read what was on the thread, because I've never seen. Yeah, I almost can't even talk about it to me. What was not said about me and what would be done, and like never would I be on a social media app. I raise people think, oh, if I'm online, seems extremely confident, all this. No, extremely sensitive, like, and
Well, you're
I'm
human.
getting getting
You're
so
human.
much better at this, but like, what was not said about me would, yeah. So that's why I obviously took a step back, and then I went. That's why I went to Instagram. My Instagram before that was just pictures of my golden retriever, and now it's political. Like, I had no intentions of ever having my Instagram political, just of my gorgeous dog. But as that's the way it works. But so, well, first of all, in the age of i- i- in the age of how to blend the two, how to okay, so okay, I'm going to like revert my thoughts and say what I say about diplomacy and politics. I call it like the gender of diplomacy. Okay, and by this I mean, this is not a fight between men versus women. And this goes for politics too. And this is the thesis. And when I speak about the gender and diplomacy, but I speak about the gender of diplomacy, I really try and make this point clear. Um, from all my research, it's that diplomacy itself has a gender, which seems a strange statement to make. So I'll just expand on that a little. So diplomacy, simply starting in the 1500s in the Italian city-states, was developed by men for men. That's simply just historical fact. And so all these traits that we have seen in history that have been defined as masculine. So all the research states tall, which rules me out, but like tall, rational, um, tall, rational, I
Elite.
can't, yeah, all of these things, I can usually just name off from the top of my head, but all these things that were seen as masculine traits, they were the things that were promoted in diplomacy, and they and to some extent they very much still are.
Mm.
And this affect, and then so the female traits, um and again, this is when I say that this is all historically based of how we defined female, and myth, but it was that, extremely much more passive. A quote from Sir Harold Nicholson, who, this was not that long ago, and I know this quote verbatim, and this is still in the diplomatic textbooks that students read. He said, quote, "Women are prone to the qualities of zeal, sympathy, and intuition, which, unless kept under the firmest control, can be dangerous qualities in international affairs." End quote. And yeah, and so
For those
I don't know
listening,
about you, and
we're shaking
I
our
don't,
head.
yeah, I don't want to speak for you, but I I would think that you, along with both, men and women diplomats, would firmly believe that zeal, sympathy, and intuition are like innate qualities for diplomats to have, like some of the best to
And
have.
the reason why I believe many
Yeah,
many houses do not work, and when I mean by house, I mean democratic institutions don't
yeah,
work, because there's not enough of those traits that you've just listened
yeah.
within the bones of
Because
the house.
exactly, so these historically were always seen as qualities not to be promoted. And why I always say it's not a thing of men versus women, because men are affected by this too. So if men don't have these qualities of rationality, being told, these like leadership qualities, they are not promoted either. Like, I've seen it in foreign ministries around the world. So it's not just women who are affected by this. If men don't show those qualities, and if women then show the qualities of what we see as, or what diplomacy is deemed, masculine qualities to promote, they are promoted, or else they feel an obligation. And I, like, being brutally honest, I felt it too, that sometimes I have to put on a front, which is not me, to do certain things. I would be more zeal, sympathy, and intuition, rather than, the other traits which are promotable, but you have to put them on in order to be. Now the world, of course, and as you say, the houses are very much changing, and I really want to give so much credit where credit is due. Even in the last decade, 15 years since I've been working with ministries of foreign affairs, it has gotten much better, but we've got so much work to do. So going back then to the gender of diplomacy, what we need to do is start looking at all these traits as just as worthy, right?
Mhm.
And just as promotable, that they so both, as I said, men and women are affected, that no one needs to be putting on these fronts. Yes, they might actually suit different ambassadorships. They might suit different places, but they shouldn't be categorized as the characteristics that are
Pinnacle
promoted.
to
And this
reach.
is, yeah, and this is not just, this is me. I'm not just saying this um, off the top of my head. This is from, years of research. This is all years of data, like years of selection of data, um, and all the evidence supports this.
Can I
And
can I ask with that just can I
yeah,
ask with that just before we move on to another area of great expertise of yours? But picking up that point, does it happen when we as voters are educated on the exact same those traits that you talk about? Does it happen when we begin within the media or conversations like this begin to say, what are we missing in terms of characteristics and values within our democratic processes? Or are we are we building to that? Are we anywhere near that?
Yeah, no, we are definitely near it. And anytime I give a lecture on this, when I wrote the book, it was not pessimistic. It was pessimistic, but it's not. I'm not at this like severely pessimistic stage. We have a long way to go, but I am very much the person of, we need to give credit to institutions where credit is due. Diplomacy is a slow moving, as you know, vehicle, and progress is being made. So we should acknowledge that. But no, regarding the vouchers, no, because we see the intake in so many different forms of the intake coming in as nearly. Well, let's just look at foreign affairs, for example. A lot of foreign affairs, there's actually more intake of women sometimes, right? So it's getting up to these. It's the media you mentioned that's a huge, huge aspect, and it goes back to the deep fakes, the targeting of women online, which is again not in any way a personal opinion. Amnesty International, human rights reports, everyone has uh, uh, done detailed work on this, on data on women politicians and diplomats online, and how they are targeted compared to men. Uh, but for example, eh, I'll give you like one example how immediately it starts. It's not good enough just at the very end when you mentioned, bringing in nominating both a man and a woman. Uh, it's at the end where people have critique saying, "Oh well, this person doesn't have experience, so they're just being put forward because of because they're a woman." One way to ensure that this does not happen is, let's take for example the diplomacy. So in the 50 states, top 50 OECD states that I covered, if you look at the entry point of women, so when they do their first posting on the 50 states, they are not sent to what diplomacy calls, for better or worse, quote, violent or war-torn regions. For whatever reason, we can assume, I guess, that the safety reasons and, historically women were not sent there. But the issue about that is, as I always say to my students, why are you telling me this? Why should I care? So anytime they say a sentence, well, why are you telling me this? Well, this matters because if women don't get, and men, as I said, who have those characters, if they don't get that experience at the junior level in diplomacy, and I'm sure this is, there's so many similarities in so many other political institutions, if they don't get that experience, that's seen as quote unquote putting in your time. So from the moment they enter, if they don't get that as their first posting or second posting, they're on the back foot. So then by the time they get to the kind of the top level, they don't have the same experience. So then there is valid argument to say, well, this person has much more experience over this person. So it's a complete, it's from the moment they enter, it needs to be done. It's not just at the top level, and you can't just go nominating people,
just because
that
of a
road
gender.
that road changes. It needs to be, people have to have the experience, they have to have the knowledge, and they have to have worked just like everyone else. But that starts with institutions giving everyone a fair one from the very, very start, the minute they get in.
No doubt you can hear it. The Parachute Candidate, this podcast has been about making sure people are hearing that passion and then going to do their own investigation work, reading, asking further questions. I mean, ultimately, this is for some a start of a conversation, for others like yourself and hopefully some of your students listening, a continued journey of learning. So that lifelong learning piece is incredibly important within all works, but particularly on gender and digital. Shifting to what we've seen for many, many years, but very much highlighted since early October of last year in the war in the Middle East. You've been incredibly vocal on this, very informative on this, and there's, fair to say, a lot of information out there. Can you talk us through what is happening and what you potentially could see likely to happen next? Now, just for disclaimer, we're filming this, we're recording this, I should say, on February 14th, 2024. A couple of hours ago, the Taoiseach Varadkar and the Spanish Prime Minister has put a letter to the President of the Commission. I will add this into that recording. Conscious, though, as we record this and before this goes out, there will be a time period. And as we've seen in the news, this is moving very, very fast. So I'm just very, very conscious too, Jennifer, not to hold you into a space where you're like, hang on, in 24 hours, this could be a completely different answer. But in 1 hour, never mind a number of hours. So can you talk us through the gendered or digital space of where we are in this war?
As mentioned, we're speaking on February 14th. Regarding, well, first of all, I'll just say this is the first day when I was posting, and as you mentioned, I've been extremely vocal since October 8th, and this is the first day I posted the words on a post saying I'm truly out of words, like I am out of words with the videos, and I'm stopping myself getting upset here. It's just we've all seen what is happening. Regarding the digital, it's extremely hard to even speak about it in such academic terms, at the moment. Like, just being, completely honest, because there's nothing academic about it. It is utterly inhumane. It is barbaric. It is immorality that I have truly never seen before in my life. And as I mentioned, I worked on the Khmer Rouge tribunals, for a number of years, and I have seen people nearly every day, face to face, who were charged and convicted with genocide and crimes against humanity. I've been brought out with the court to the killing fields in Cambodia. I've heard the worst stories that I thought, and of course, it doesn't even need to be a disclaimer. This is not about me in the slightest. I'm just, giving context, and in no way to compare genocides. That is not in any way why I'm saying this. But I truly thought that was the worst of humanity, and that was the worst I'd ever hear or see and in my life. But trying to get my head in a space to even begin to analyze it regarding the digital, why I feel that it is so beyond anything that I have and the world has seen or experienced before, is because, again, of the social media devices. We are seeing, as per the ICJ, they openly said that there is a severe case for a genocidal proceedings to begin. We're seeing this played out on our phones day in, day out, and so many of us, millions, billions across the world, states included, have been calling for months, and it's not just posting, marches, people standing outside parliaments across the world, and, doing everything they can. And it has completely changed my opinion of digital diplomacy or technology on diplomacy. And the reason it has changed it is because, and you said this on posts before, but call me naive, call me stupid, call me, why didn't you even see that this could be the possibility? But I always thought that if billions of people around the world, we've seen the marches in nearly every capital, everyone calling for this to stop. And, you know, the ICJ ruling, we've seen the UN General Assembly vote overwhelmingly to stop this, and all of this on social media. But ultimately, it has not stopped it in any way. In any way, it is still happening, and that it's not even highly questionable about the power of social media. It just shows you that when states are that large and that powerful, the US and Israel, they are more powerful than all those billions of people combined on social media. Now, that is not to say that everything that everyone is doing and all the protests, everything isn't working. It definitely is. People are listening, and whether it's for their self-interest that politicians are writing letters, and I'm not referring to the Irish letter here, but whether it's in other countries turning the tide and saying, we no longer stand with it, whether it's in their self-interest or not. At this moment, as a pragmatist, I don't care. I just will deal with their self-interest later. We need to make it stop, but I do think social media has played the largest role in getting countries to turn their tide, because A, for the elections, and B, they want to stay in power, and C, it could hopefully, if we want to remain optimistic, it's for humane and reasons of morality. Now, if this was any other country, well, first, this wouldn't have transpired the way it did. But I think social media would have been able to turn the tide much sooner. But it is the sheer power of the US, their power on the Security Council, and Israel, that clearly is the sole hurdle to the sheer power of social media. I've never seen social media gathered in such a way. Like, everyone all over the world, like you've seen it, and MEPs, like like in your part, like people making phenomenal speeches, UN ambassadors making phenomenal speeches in the UN General Assembly, and nothing has stopped. Like, nothing has stopped them. So as I said, I always you mentioned before about it's a continuous journey of learning, like that. I will forever be taking this into account, and seeing, the constraints of social media, of the power, quote unquote, the power of the people. And again, I just want to end that with saying, this is not to say that the people have not done phenomenal work, like amazing, and it should continue. And I truly believe the tide is turning on all those states because of the people on social media. It is just, and I don't want to get upset again on it, because we're finish the podcast with you, but it just shows you that there is a limit to the power of the digital. There's a limit to the power of social media, and that is the United States and Israel. Sorry, that was
Just as
quite
you, no,
intense.
I mean, no, brutal and honest and real, which is what we're not seeing from superpowers. And just as you were talking there, and my last question coming to you, but I kept thinking of, what is pro democratic Israeli seeing online in Israel. You know, because I often, and unfortunately, we don't have the time to go in. But if you move into the aggression towards Ukraine, I often say when I talk about that, particularly in schools, I'm like, we also have to remember there is more than likely, one would assume or hope, that there's pro-democratic Russians. But how social media is working is just is a powerhouse, or in this case, not breaking through, not penetrating into the leaders that it needs to.
Yeah, one thing, and a term I coined is, um, which is the thing I'm writing on, is I call it the foreign policy of Silicon Valley. And that Silicon Valley also has a foreign policy. We've seen mass censorship online. Again, this is no conspiracy theory. This is all based on data and evidence. We've seen embassies who are now accredited solely to Silicon Valley. Denmark, France is considering creating one, which has never been the case since 1648, when there's only been an embassy accredited to a nation state. But these embassies are solely accredited to Silicon Valley. For example, Ireland has a West Coast consulate, and the Irish press section deals with Silicon Valley. That is like most countries on the West Coast. But some countries are, recognizing the sheer power of Silicon Valley. For example, Denmark in 2014, when they created their embassy, they created it because their entire GDP was only 25% of Facebook's entire market capitalization. So they know the power of Silicon Valley, and I truly believe, have the evidence that there is a foreign policy of Silicon Valley, and that there is, as you rightly noted, like there is a limit to what can be said online, and the great powers. And yes, it's a wonderful tool, and I will use it while criticizing it. So I'm not going to choose the Irish phrase, throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it certainly has an agenda. And I have been in the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and they're the top intelligence ministry in the world. And I won't get into a number of things seen there, but their intelligence is next to none. Their ability, going back to disinformation, their ability for disinformation, their ability to create deepfakes, etc. And if these, I'm jumping around here, but this is the actual central point I wanted to make. Looking at Russia and Ukraine, what I write about and what I note is that Silicon Valley put all their money into Ukraine, and without Silicon Valley, we wouldn't know who Zelensky was. We wouldn't, without social media apps, we wouldn't know who Zelensky was. And I'm glad we do. And he used the apps how they're meant to be used. He's phenomenal at using them. However, the key point I want to make here is they pulled out of Russia. Okay, and it's for nation branding, you would call it. It's for their foreign policy. But exactly as you said, what I say is I actually think it's unethical. I know there is restrictions. There would have been restrictions in Russia anyway, but a lot of people get around this through VPN. And you have to ask yourself, is it moral, and ethical? And I don't think so, to remove that information from Russian citizens for them to hear what is happening all around the world. And I know they're Western apps and they're Western created, but it's still one of the biggest sources of information that we have, these key apps that we all know what we're referring to. And so I don't think it's ethical for Silicon Valley to have pulled out of Russia, as you exactly said, for the democratic citizens who who are in there, because just like we're seeing in Israel, we can't conflate the people with the powers. And that's what I'm always saying. This is not this. These are state wars. These are wars by leaders and their cabinets. And yes, they're supported by people they're voted in, but there are a huge majority who do not support this. So we need to be really, really careful of brandishing an entire state, just like in brandishing entire Russia or Israel, and keep our eyes focused on who exactly is doing this, who's putting the strings, and who's telling, the cabinets and the ministers to do what. So yeah, access to information for those people is absolutely vital. You can't punish, and you shouldn't punish, even if you have the power and you don't like their policies. You shouldn't punish people just because they're part of, a state. They deserve, if it's meant to be a democratic country, particularly in Israel, they deserve to have access to everything that's going on.
Final question, and I could chat to you. Bear in mind, everybody listening, I mean, I could pick one of these many questions and get really into to greater detail. So I apologize for everybody listening who are probably pulling their hair out to say, no, ask her more questions. This is where we go. But please follow Jennifer online, and better yet, even download her PhD work and her many case studies and the many courses offered online that you teach, as well as, hey, if you want to study under her, you'll find her in Oxford, which is super exciting. But
I'm always trying to bring Irish people along. So seriously,
bring up that Irish number for ballots.
Oh no, like definitely, I do it for free. Like, people who don't know about the admissions process, I've helped, like, for the last 7 years, people doing it.
But final question, to pick up on everything we've just talked about. 2 questions I regularly get asked: what are you doing to end the wars as a policymaker in the European Union? And what can I do? And in the face of multiple wars in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in parts of Africa, I bring in online and offline. What would be your advice and guidance if you could sum that up in a short piece? Easier said than done.
Yeah. Precisely. I even, as I said previously, today was the first day I said, after watching those videos, like, I'm out of words. And so many people comment under my videos or the post saying, what can I do? What can I do? And I ask myself this question every day. So, people who are struggling with this and saying, am I doing enough? What can I do? Just know that, people in Parliament, people like myself, who's a diplomatic scholar, was a diplomat. I'm asking myself this too. This is and that is if you're asking yourself that is a question that makes you human, and that is a start. Like, and that shows that you have humanity, morality, and you want to help. So, what can you do? Well, we've focused and looked a lot on the social media aspect, and we've looked at the the letters that have just been sent by Ireland and Spain. We've also looked at the or we haven't mentioned it, but even just talking now, like South Africa, their phenomenal leadership in this. Yeah, and I truly believe with all the faults of social media, as I said, that it actually can stop the US and Israel. What it has done, it has pushed so many countries and so many leaders, as I said, whether it is in their self-interest or whether they simply do want to do it for the better of mankind. We can deal with those questions after, when we stop these
What was
crises.
said.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, like enough of this. As a diplomat, you probably shouldn't say this, but like enough of these long-term strategies talk, because talking about Gaza, there will be no Gaza left to discuss. There will be no people left to talk about. So stop with your long-term strategies. You need to act now. But truly, what people can do is, as hard as it is, um, and I know the multiple crises around the world that you've mentioned, all which should be given, equal creed, of course. But just looking at Gaza at this very moment, I know silence is and has been an option for many. I know it's tough. As I said, I've been, I've received the death threats, and that was in October. But now, it's never too late. It's never too late to speak up. It's never too late to raise your voice and keep yourself informed. As I said, get credible sources. Keep using your voice, attending protests. I know people are at the point, and I'm at the point too, where you might think this is futile. It's not working, but we are seeing the tide shift. We are seeing it happen, and we've seen in history. Look at the Good Friday Agreement. Look at the FARC deal in Colombia. Peace treaties have happened in areas where we never, ever, ever thought they were going to happen. Like where no one ever conceived that this would end. And it's the people that did it. The politicians are not going to do it on their own. They're going, not guided by the public, they're going to be pushed by the public. So use your voice as strong as you can. And the other question you asked was, what are we going to do to end the war? To end the wars? Well, again, another PhD topic. But truly, diplomacy is truly the only answer. And I don't say that as like a biased diplomatic scholar, but the only way we've seen in the international peace treaties beforehand, as I mentioned, Colombia, even the Khmer Rouge, and the Good Friday Agreement, diplomacy and open communication is the only way this is going to, it's the only way it's going to end. So there's 3 key pillars of diplomacy: negotiation, communication, and representation. And the pillar of communication just can't falter. And so those lines of diplomacy have to be open.
Jennifer and I discussed a lot in this podcast episode, the final of the series of The Parachute Candidate. Her work is fascinating and complicated. We are living through significant development of AI, information being shared at a speed I don't know anyone could ever imagine. But as Jennifer explained from her work, this era of digital diplomacy is an evolution, not a revolution. Jennifer shares with such angst and heartbreak the atrocities of what the Palestinian people are living through and what we are witnessing on our screens in Gaza. No words can overcome what Jennifer has shared. Please listen and please share. Until next time, thank you for joining our conversation.